So this video will be about team rosters, about building them and using them. So when you want to build a team roster, of course, you get a choice about the school that you want to build a roster for in the sport. But once you get done making the roster, you can make actually up to 6, and they're stored on your team roster page. So for example, let's look at team roster 807, and it's a basketball roster. It's got 5 players on it. The important thing to understand about making a team roster is that rosters change over the course of a season, and only the maker can make a change in the roster. So it's important that the maker keep the roster up to date. The changes that can happen in a season are a player can come into the school, or a player may leave the school. Coaches can make changes in the roster and who's starting for the team. And it's important that the maker keep up to date if the roster is going to be useful. So what we'll do in this video is to look at how one makes the changes to the roster. So for example, if one wished to make a change to the first player, one can go, let's say you want to make the first player a starter. So we click save, and now you can see this first player is a starting player on the team. Let's say that you want to make a change to the position that this last player is playing. So we click to change the position, and instead of point guard, we choose to make this player the center, and we save that. Now, let's say you want to change the order of the roster. We can push the player up. So now the center is the 3rd player listed in our roster. So these are examples of changes that can be made in the roster by the maker, but only by the maker. Now, in the Fans Help Players system, when you make a roster, you have a choice of attaching an email address to the roster. If you attach an email address, it means the other users can email the maker with a suggestion about making changes. It's a help to keep the roster up to date. This is so important, keeping the roster up to date, that if a maker doesn't touch a roster for a year, no changes whatsoever, the system assumes that that roster has been abandoned by the maker, and that roster will be deleted. So if you're going to make a roster, and you can make up to 6, if you make rosters, try to keep them up to date so that people who use the roster can use an accurate roster. Now, as far as using the roster, here's someone who wants to search for the roster and use it. Let's say this user chooses team 807, the same roster we were just looking at. Team 807, and click to view here. This roster is now the up-to-date. Notice this person is playing center, and they're in the middle position of the roster. This first player is a starter, so the changes that we made have been accepted, and they're viewable by another user, not the maker, but someone else. And if, for example, the viewer wishes to view this individual's profile and even buy a badge from this person, they're able to do so. Click here to buy the badge. At the same time, multiple purchases are possible on the roster. So for example, suppose this viewer clicks to purchase a badge, a Team Spirit badge from the 1st and the 3rd individual on this roster. Then they click the buy screen and they select a value that will apply to each of those individual badges. And so with a click, they can buy, in this case, $7 badges, one from each of the 2 players that they've designated. So that gives an idea about how team rosters are made, how they're updated, and how they're used in the system. Thank you.